Imagine winning battle after battle, but still losing the war. That is the paradox of America in Vietnam. The United States had more money, more aircraft, more helicopters, more artillery, more bombs, more technology, more global power. It could destroy bases, bomb supply routes, move troops across oceans, build airfields in jungles, and call in firepower almost anywhere. But after years of fighting, America still left Vietnam without achieving its main goal. South Vietnam eventually collapsed. North Vietnam won. So the question is simple. How could the most powerful military in the world fail to win? The answer is not that American soldiers were weak. It is not that American weapons could not destroy. And it is not that America lost every battle. The deeper problem was this. America was trying to solve a political war with military power. And military power could destroy targets, but it could not build the political outcome America needed. That is why America could not win the Vietnam War. The first problem was the meaning of victory. America's goal sounded simple: stop South Vietnam from falling to communism. In the Cold War, that made sense. Washington feared that if South Vietnam fell, America would look weak. Allies might lose trust. Enemies might become bolder. Communism might spread further in Asia, so Vietnam became more than a country. It became a test of American credibility. But that created a dangerous problem. America knew what it wanted to stop. It wanted to stop communism, stop North Vietnam, stop the Viet Cong. Stop collapse. But stopping something is not the same as building something. To truly win, America needed South Vietnam to become strong enough to survive on its own. It needed a stable government, a capable army, local trust, political legitimacy, and a reason for ordinary people to believe in Saigon more than Hanoi. That was much harder than winning a battle. America could send troops. It could send money. It could send helicopters. It could send advisors. But it could not simply manufacture legitimacy. Legitimacy has to grow inside a society. And South Vietnam had deep problems: political instability, corruption, weak rural control, factional conflict, and heavy dependence on American support. Many South Vietnamese soldiers fought bravely. Many civilians did not want communist rule. But the South Vietnamese state never became strong enough to carry the war by itself. That mattered because Vietnam was not only a military battlefield, it was also a political battlefield. Every village mattered. Every official mattered. Every rumor mattered. Every act of corruption mattered. Every civilian mistake mattered. The United States could clear an area with force, but if people did not trust the government that came afterward, the enemy could return. That is the second problem. America could take ground, but it could not always hold loyalty. In a conventional war, a map can show progress. You capture a city. You hold a road. You defeat an army, but Vietnam was different. A village could look secure during the day. At night, Viet Cong influence could return. A road could be open this week. Next week, it could be dangerous again. An enemy unit could disappear after a battle, but disappearing was often part of the enemy's strategy. America wanted decisive battles. The enemy wanted survival. America wanted to find, fix, and destroy enemy forces. North Vietnam and the Viet Cong wanted to avoid destruction, keep fighting, and make the war last. They did not need to destroy the U.S. military. They did not need to invade America. They did not need to win every battle. They only needed to outlast America's will to continue. That was a very different kind of victory. For Washington, Vietnam was a costly Cold War commitment far from home. For Hanoi, it was a struggle for national reunification and revolutionary victory. That difference changed everything. America asked, "How much longer will this cost us?" Hanoi asked, "Can we endure until the Americans leave?" Those are not the same question. A loss that looked unbearable to America could be accepted by North Vietnam if the final goal still seemed worth it. A bombing campaign that looked devastating from Washington could be treated in Hanoi as another hardship to survive. That is why time became one of North Vietnam's greatest weapons. America had elections, television, protests, casualty lists, budgets, public opinion. and growing frustration. North Vietnam had suffering too, but it also had a strategy built around endurance. The war did not need to become impossible for America militarily. It only needed to become unacceptable politically. That is why the Tet Offensive mattered so much. Militarily, Tet was a major defeat for communist forces. They suffered heavy losses. They did not hold the cities they attacked. They failed to create the uprising they hoped for. But politically, Tet shocked America. Many Americans had been told the war was going well. Then suddenly, attacks erupted across South Vietnam. Even if the United States and South Vietnam won the battles, the psychological damage was huge. Tet made many Americans ask, if we are winning, why can the enemy still do this? That was the gap between battlefield success and political confidence. And in a democracy, political confidence matters. The third problem was how America measured progress. American leaders often counted things that were easy to count. How many missions were flown? How many bombs were dropped? How many enemy fighters were killed? How many weapons were captured? How many villages were cleared? How many roads were opened? These numbers were real, but they could also be misleading. They measured activity. They measured destruction. They measured effort, but they did not always measure control. They did not measure legitimacy. They did not measure whether villagers trusted Saigon. They did not measure whether the enemy's political network had disappeared. And they did not measure whether the American public still believed the war was worth the cost. That was the trap. America could win a firefight and still fail to change the war. It could destroy an enemy unit and still see another one appear later. It could clear a village and still lose influence there after nightfall. It could bomb a supply route and still watch supplies continue moving. The fourth problem was geography. Vietnam was not a clean battlefield. It had jungles, mountains, rivers, rice paddies, villages, border regions, and neighboring Laos and Cambodia. The enemy could move, hide, withdraw, rebuild, and return. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was the clearest example. It was not one road. It was a flexible logistics network. Roads, footpaths, rivers, truck routes, bicycle routes, porters, hidden depots, repair crews, camouflage teams, alternative paths. Bombing could damage it. Bombing could delay it. Bombing could make movement harder. But bombing could not fully stop it. And North Vietnam did not need perfect logistics. It only needed enough logistics. Not every road. Enough roads. Not every truck. Enough movement. Not every depot. Enough supplies. The United States needed to stop the system. North Vietnam only needed to keep part of the system alive. Those are not equal tasks. The fifth problem was limited war. America had enormous power, but it did not fight with unlimited freedom. Washington did not want a direct war with China. It did not want a direct war with the Soviet Union. It did not want Vietnam to become a much larger global war. So America placed limits on where it could strike, how far it could escalate, and what risks it could take. Those limits were not random. They were part of Cold War reality. But they created frustration. From the military point of view, the enemy seemed to benefit from sanctuaries, outside support, and political restrictions. From the political point of view, removing all limits could create a much bigger disaster. So America fought a war that was massive and limited at the same time. Massive enough to cause enormous destruction, limited enough to prevent a total military solution. This contradiction never went away. The sixth problem was bombing. American air power was terrifying. It destroyed roads, bridges, depots, bases, vehicles, rail lines, and supply routes. But bombing could not answer the most important question. Would Hanoi quit? The United States often saw damage as pressure, but pressure only works if the enemy decides the cost is too high. North Vietnam decided the cost was acceptable compared to the goal. That does not mean bombing had no effect. It had huge effects. It killed. It damaged. It delayed. It forced repairs. It made the war harder. But harder is not the same as impossible. Painful is not the same as decisive. Destructive is not the same as persuasive. The seventh problem was America's home front. Vietnam became a war Americans watched from their living rooms. Television showed the conflict. Journalists reported from the field. Protests grew. Families questioned the draft. Students marched. Veterans came home with trauma and doubt. The government said progress was being made. But the war kept going. The public heard optimistic briefings. Then saw Tet. Heard about body counts. Then saw more casualties. Heard that victory was near. But victory never seemed to arrive. This created a credibility gap. And once many Americans stopped believing the official explanation, the foundation of the war cracked. North Vietnam did not need to defeat every American unit. It needed America to decide the war was no longer worth continuing. Eventually, that happened. The final problem was that America confused military power with political control. The United States could destroy an enemy bunker. But could it make villagers trust Saigon? It could bomb a trail. But could it erase the reason that trail existed? It could kill enemy fighters. But could it stop replacements from coming? It could win battles. But could it prove the war was ending? It could support a government. But could it make that government legitimate? Again and again, the answer was, not enough. America had extraordinary power. But Vietnam required a kind of victory that power alone could not deliver. That is why America could win battles and still lose the war. It failed because South Vietnam never became strong enough on its own, because North Vietnam only needed to survive long enough, because American metrics measured destruction more easily than legitimacy, because geography and the Ho Chi Minh Trail kept the war alive, because Cold War limits prevented total escalation, because public support in America eroded, and because the war's central problem was political, not just military. By the time America signed the Paris Peace Accords in 1973, the goal had changed. At the beginning, the goal was to save South Vietnam. By the end, the goal was to leave without looking completely defeated. U.S. forces withdrew. American prisoners came home. Washington could say the war was over for America. But the war in Vietnam was not truly over. In 1975, Saigon fell. That was the final proof that American military power had failed to create a lasting political result. So return to the opening image. A superpower enters a small country with overwhelming force. It wins firefights. It drops bombs. It builds bases. It sends helicopters over jungles. It counts enemy losses. It announces progress. But beneath all of that, the real questions remain unanswered. Who controls the villages? Who has legitimacy? Who can endure longer? Who can survive the cost? Who can turn military action into political victory? In Vietnam, America never found a good answer. That is why the United States could win battles and still lose the war. Not because power did not matter. Power mattered enormously, but power was not enough. The Vietnam War showed that the strongest military in the world can destroy almost any target it can find, and still fail to build the political outcome it needs. A war is not won when the enemy suffers. A war is won when the enemy's strategy fails. In Vietnam, America caused enormous suffering, but North Vietnam's strategy survived, and America's strategy did not.